The barn reeked of sweat, old hay, and something more sour, something like fear. A crude platform stood at the center, cobbled together from old planks and hoisted just high enough to let every pair of eyes have a clean look. And there were many eyes, cold, calculating, and hungry. It wasn't cattle they were bidding on today. It was a girl. One girl. A virgin, by decree of the slate board behind her that read in bold, chalky letters. Untouched. 18, wild but fresh. The lanterns flickered along the wooden rafters, shadows stretching and recoiling with each sway of the flames. Around the barn circumference stood men from the bordering counties, some farmers, others traders, all looking to buy a girl not for love, not for kindness, but for ownership. The town called it a contractual arrangement, as if such language could disguise the rot beneath. In truth, it was an auction, and the girl at the center had no say. Her name was Alira. She stood barefoot on the splintered platform, her arms trembling behind her, hands bound loosely with a coarse rope that had scraped her wrists raw. Her long black hair clung to her neck in the June humidity, and though her dress was modest, its thin fabric clung to her skin under the weight of every pair of eyes measuring her. A loose collar hung around her neck, not of metal, but of old leather, worn from reuse, stained by rain and the desperation of girls before her. Alira had been raised by no one and everyone. A ward of the county, passed from house to house, she learned how to clean, how to cook, and most importantly, how to survive. Her sharp tongue had kept many men from touching her, but also painted her as difficult, a label that became a curse. When she turned 18, she stopped moving between homes. There was no new placement, no next family, just a knock on her door one morning and the announcement. She was to be auctioned. The man standing at the head of the platform was Joss Bannock, a portly, sun-reddened man who owned the barn and ran these backwoods auctions like a county fair sideshow. His voice, loud and grating, filled the space. She's clean, she's quick-witted, and she'll give you hell until you tame her. Just like a good mare, he chuckled. We'll start the bid at 50. Laughter rumbled through the crowd. The first hand shot up, gnarled fingers of a pig farmer named Rudley, who reeked of spirits. Then another, a slick-haired merchant from out east. The bids climbed steadily. 50, 75, 110. Alira kept her chin high, though her jaw clenched hard. Her nails dug into her palms behind her back. They didn't ask her name. No one ever did. No one asked how she felt about being sold like an animal. She saw their eyes when they looked at her, some amused, some already undressing her in their minds. She wanted to run, but where would she go? Outside, two men stood with rifles, watching not just for intruders, but for escapees. The auction was secret, but well organized. She was property, and property didn't run free. Another bid, 130. 150. Joss clapped his hands together, his palms sweaty even in the thick heat. A fine girl, this one. Spirited. She'll keep your nights interesting. 160. Do I hear 160? More hands. More noise. Then silence. It came so abruptly that even the crickets outside seemed to stop. Joss's voice stuttered in the gap. People turned, as though a ghost had entered the barn. Standing near the back, just behind a leaning post, was a man no one had noticed before. He was tall, lean, and covered in a dusted coat that looked like it hadn't been washed in weeks. A brimmed hat shadowed his face, and he hadn't said a word since the bidding began. He had watched it all with eyes like stone, unflinching, unreadable. Now he raised one hand. Just once. No movement, no nod. Just that hand. Joss squinted. We got a new bid. His voice cracked under the sudden quiet. The man didn't speak. He simply stepped forward. People whispered. Who the hell is that? Alira stared, confused. The man's presence was different, not possessive, not leering, just still. His boots thudded against the barn floor as he walked to the front, past the rows of now silent bidders. When he stopped, he reached into his coat and dropped a small pouch onto the edge of the platform. It hit with a heavy clink. Joss eyed it, untying the string cautiously. He looked inside. Sweet hell, he muttered, eyes wide. That's over 200 silver. Murmurs surged in the crowd. That's more than she's worth. He's overbidding, why would he? Who is this guy? Joss turned to the man. You bidding 200 for her? The man tilted his head slowly, just once. A yes. Joss looked stunned. All right then. Sold. A rustle of disbelief passed through the crowd. Men stared at the newcomer like he was mad. Alira could only blink. 200 silver? She'd never even seen that much. Who was this man? He climbed the steps of the platform slowly. Not aggressively. Not like the others might have, eager to claim their prize. He stopped beside her, took out a knife, not to frighten her, but to cut the rope from her wrists. His hands were calloused, but careful. The rope fell to the ground. Why you sure you don't want her tag papers? Joss asked, voice suddenly meek. The man shook his head. No name, then. Joss added. The man turned, his voice like dry earth. Callan. That's all he said. He gently placed a worn wool cloak around Alira's shoulders, an old thing, smelling of pine and sweat and horses. She didn't resist. Something in her chest, some tight string of fear, loosened just enough to breathe again. He led her out of the barn. The silence behind them wasn't peaceful. It was stunned, as if everyone had watched something impossible happen. The auction ended. The rifleman outside watched Callan and the girl walk down the dirt road with puzzled eyes, but no one stopped them. Who would question a man who paid double what anyone else would? Alira didn't speak for the first mile. Her feet were raw, her mind racing. What did he want? Why didn't he touch her? Why bid that much? Finally, as they reached the edge of a split field, wild sunflowers brushing against the fence line, she asked the question tearing at her gut. Why'd you buy me? He stopped, turned his head slightly, though his face was still mostly shadowed by his hat. I didn't, he said, voice low. She stared. You paid. I paid to get you out of there, he said, simple as truth. Her mouth parted, but the words didn't come. He turned again, continuing toward the line of trees ahead where the sunset was bleeding into orange. You're not mine. You're not anyone's, he added. And that, more than anything, the walk, the silver, even the cloak on her shoulders, was what shook her the most. Not his silence, but his mercy. The road bent sharply between tall grasses and dense sycamores, sun flickering through their leaves in golden threads. Alira followed behind Callan, the silent farmer who had, hours earlier, bid an impossible sum to free her from a life no one should be born into. He hadn't spoken since, save the one line he'd given her, "You're not mine. You're not anyone's." And though those words echoed with kindness, they also opened a deeper question she hadn't dared ask yet. Who was he? His farm sat beyond a crumbling stone wall, nearly hidden from view by overgrowth. The land was wide but not grand. Fences leaned like tired men. The barn had one cornerbout in. Yet everything was alive. The orchard trees bore fruit, chickens scuttled beneath wooden crates, and a dog lay stretched on the porch like it had lived 1,000 peaceful lives. It wasn't wealth, but it was freedom, and to Alira, that made it the richest place she'd ever seen. Callan pushed open the screen door and gestured with a nod for her to enter first. She did, wary but curious. The inside smelled of old pine, earth, and dried herbs. Everything was simple. A stone fireplace, a narrow bed in the corner, and shelves lined with books, jars, and small wooden carvings. Birds, horses, hands clasped in prayer. Not what she expected from a man who bought girls. Sit, he said softly, pointing toward a worn stool by the fire. She sat, not because she was told, but because she needed a rest. Her legs ached, her feet swollen. The emotional weight pressing on her chest had grown unbearable. But still, she held her questions like loaded arrows. She didn't know if she was safe. Callan knelt near the hearth and struck flint against steel. Sparks leapt. Flames began to curl around the kindling. He didn't rush, didn't fumble. Everything he did was deliberate, careful, like he'd practiced life quietly, without haste. You hungry? He asked. She nodded. Just once. He stood, opened a cupboard, and pulled out a loaf of bread and a wedge of hard cheese. He sliced them without a word, laid them on a wooden plate, and placed it in her lap. Then he sat across the room, near the door, watching her without judgment. She chewed slowly, more from disbelief than hunger. Why'd you really do it? She asked, voice dry. He looked at her for a long while before answering. Because I've seen it before, and I never want to see it again. Her brows knit. Seen what? He took a breath that filled the whole room with silence. My sister. Elira paused, cheese halfway to her mouth. She was sold in a barn like that. I was too young to stop it. He leaned forward slightly. I still see her face. Every night, a heavy stillness settled between them. She didn't make it out? His jaw clenched. She did. But not as her. Not anymore. Elira swallowed. She understood more in that moment than she could say. The next few days moved like river water. Slow, quiet, inevitable. Callan gave her space. He made no rules. Only left things where she could find them. Fresh clothes on the bed. Soap in a basin by the back door. A brush beside the mirror. Not once did he enter her space uninvited. He spent most of his time outside, fixing fences, tending to livestock, harvesting beans and onions. Elira watched him from the porch sometimes, silently studying the man who seemed carved from oak and silence. When she offered to help, he nodded. Not eagerly, not dismissively, just a quiet welcome. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become it. One morning, Elira stood beside him as he showed her how to plant onions in tight rows. The soil was warm, the sun on her back soothing. She looked at his hands, big, square-knuckled, callous from years of real work. Not violence, not cruelty, labor. You don't talk much, she said lightly, brushing dirt from her fingers. Nothing worth wasting breath on. He replied without looking up. You spent 200 silver to buy me, and you think talking's a waste? She tried to tease, but her voice cracked under the weight of the truth. He didn't answer. Do you miss her? She asked after a pause. My sister. She nodded. Every day. Elira lowered her eyes to the soil. I don't remember my mother's face, she said softly. Only her hands. She braided my hair once. That's all I have. Callan looked over. That's enough to remember someone by. They fell into silence again, not the uneasy kind, but something that felt like a truce. A shared grief, side by side in the dirt. Days became a rhythm. Work in the morning, meals in the afternoon, stories traded at dusk, slowly, hesitantly, like bartering goods between two wary merchants. Elira spoke more than he did. She told him about the town she'd passed through, the people she'd hated, the ones who scared her, and the rare ones who had shown her kindness. A teacher with bad teeth, but kind eyes, an old woman who once taught her how to read from an almanac. She was surprised how much she remembered, how much she'd held inside. Callan listened, always, never interrupting, sometimes nodding, sometimes just sitting there, letting the firelight flicker across his face as if every word she spoke mattered. It felt like something she'd never had before. Not safety, not yet, but respect. It was late one night when she finally asked, Why did you leave it all? He was carving something, another bird, it looked like. His knife paused mid-shave. What do you mean? You said you saw it before. With your sister. But you didn't stop it then. So why now? His eyes met hers, tired and deep. Because back then, I was a boy with no voice. Now I'm a man who chooses silence. That's different. She tilted her head. You think silence is better? It's not better, he said. But sometimes it's safer. For the people around me. Elira stared at him. She wanted to ask what he meant, what he was hiding. But some instincts, sharpened from years of surviving others' cruelty, told her to leave it be. That night, as she lay in the narrow bed by the window, she listened to the sounds of the house, wood creaking in the rafters, owls crying from the trees, and the soft scrape of Callan's chair near the hearth as he finished his carving. She thought about how different her life had become in just a week, and how frightening that change still felt. Because even freedom could be terrifying if you'd never been allowed to want it. The next morning brought thunder. Rain poured across the roof like a stampede. Elira sat by the window with a mug of tea, watching the fields drown under gray. Callan was outside still, trying to cover the coops. She ran to the porch and shouted through the rain. You'll catch your death. He waved her off with a look that said, I've seen worse. Later, soaked and dripping, he returned and stripped his coat at the door. She offered him a towel. He took it, hesitantly, and nodded. Thank you. It was the first time he'd thanked her. She smiled faintly. Don't mention it, farmer. He glanced at her, and for the first time, almost smiled. A twitch at the corner of his lips. I carved something, he said suddenly, as though confessing a crime. He handed her a small bird, a sparrow, rough but full of life. She turned in her palm, surprised. For me? He nodded. I make them for people I want to remember. Her chest tightened. She wanted to ask, why remember me? I'm still here. But she understood what he meant. In case she left. In case the world, once again, tried to steal something from him. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He met her eyes. You will. One day. A lump formed at her throat. And when I do, I'll know you got away. And not because someone bought you. Because you chose it. The rain softened into a mist by late afternoon. Alira wandered outside, barefoot, the earth squelching under her toes. A strange peace filled her chest, foreign, fragile, but undeniably there. She glanced back at the house, where smoke curled lazily from the chimney. It wasn't just a shelter. It had become something else. A place that didn't demand anything of her. A place that didn't treat her like currency. She walked to the orchard. Droplets clung to the apples like morning tears. She plucked one, bit into it, and felt the sweet juice explode on her tongue. It reminded her of being young, before the world taught her to flinch at kindness, to bargain her soul just to be left alone. That evening, as they sat by the fire once more, Alira held the carved sparrow in her hand, turning it over gently. Callan, she said softly. He looked up. Thank you for not asking anything of me, for giving me this. He gave a small nod. Just don't let the world take it back. She wouldn't. Not ever again. The morning the farmer brought Alira back to town, the air was heavy with a sense of unfinished business. Whispers had long replaced the silence that once defined the mysterious man's presence in the region. His choice at the auction had reverberated through the settlement like a tremor in the soil. Some called it noble, others naive. And now, with Alira no longer the frightened girl standing on a table, but a young woman walking alongside him of her own volition, the tension felt thicker than ever. The townspeople had gathered again, not for an auction this time, but for something less structured, more primal. It was the way of isolated towns. When answers were owed, they weren't demanded through law, but through crowd and voice. The mayor, a man of ambition more than wisdom, stood on the makeshift podium once used to sell livestock. Then women, now turned into a stage for a different kind of reckoning. The farmer, stoic and weathered, stood beside Alira, both of them framed against the sun rising behind them. Their silhouettes cast long shadows across the dirt clearing. The mayor cleared his throat. You bring her back after weeks of silence, he began, his voice part curiosity, part condemnation. You bid for her, took her away, and now you want what? Closure? The farmer didn't respond. He didn't need to. He reached into his satchel and slowly unfolded a stack of weathered parchment. Alira stepped forward and read aloud. The papers were records, proof of her parents' original land deed, now legally signed over to her. Proof that the auction had not been the only way forward. While the town sought to sell Alira for profit to resolve her deceased parents' debt, the farmer had searched for something more permanent, more just. The crowd fell into stunned silence. He bought the land, Alira said, voice steady. Paid the debt in full. Not for me, for what was owed. He worked the earth, day and night, sold his horses, tools, everything but his silence. And now the land is mine. Murmurs rippled like wind through a wheat field. The mayor hesitated. But she was the property of the town, held in custody to settle the debt. She was never property, the farmer finally said, and it was the first time most had heard him speak. His voice was quiet, firm, weather-like bark. You made her one, and that's the sin you must reckon with. Those few words cut deeper than any shout could. In them, years of silence, grief, and personal loss coalesced into truth. One of the elders, a woman with eyes clouded by time, but clear in judgment, stood and faced the mayor. We've allowed too much done in the name of survival. But survival without soul is just decay in disguise. Her voice cracked. Let this girl live. Let her decide her future. Alira stepped forward again. There's something else you all should know. She held up the small wooden bird the farmer had carved for her. He gave me this the first night. Not a word, not a condition. Just something beautiful to remind me I was more than what happened to me. And now, I want to use my land to build something for the girls of this town who have no fathers left, no mothers, no protection. A home, a place they learn they're worth more than what someone would pay. Gasps broke out, and not from indignation, from awe, from the shock of someone so young speaking with such conviction, and from the unexpected righteousness of a man so many had dismissed as backward or simple. But not everyone was moved. Joram, the trader who had started the original auction, spat at the ground. Charity? Not what you bring back. What the town's needs, the economy. You'd rather feed girls than pay for another cattle drive. The farmer looked him dead in the eye. There will always be someone who profits from silence. Not this time. A standoff hung in the air like a hell breath. Then, unexpectedly, one of the townsmen, Amos, a widower and carpenter, stepped forward. I'll help her build, he said. My tools are hers. My hands too. Another voice, I'll donate timber. And another, I've got 2 sons, they'll help lay the foundation. The tide was turning. Joram's scowl twisted deeper, but he was outnumbered, outvoiced. The mayor, sensing the direction of the wind, nodded stiffly. So be it. Let her legacy rise if the town agrees. The cheers were quiet at first, more solemn than celebratory. This was not a festival. It was rebirth. Weeks passed, and with them, the skeleton of the new home began to rise on the edge of town. The farmer didn't stay long. He never did, but he helped in silence, placing beam after beam, cutting planks with precise hands. At night, he and Alira would sit in the field, watching the stars appear one by one like scattered embers. Why did you save me? She asked one evening, breaking the familiar hush between them. He paused. Because once, someone didn't save my daughter. A chill moved over the wheat. I was too late, he continued. By the time I spoke, by the time I fought, she was gone. Her name was Aileen. I buried her with a carving, just like the one I gave you. I couldn't undo what was done to her. But maybe, just maybe, I could keep you from becoming another silence I had to live with. Alira placed her hand gently over his. You didn't just save me, she said. You helped me become something new. The final beam was raised on a golden morning. Children played in the distance. Women brought baskets of bread, and the air buzzed with a different energy, hope. The home, modest but strong, stood as proof that the choices made in silence could echo louder than words. Alira named it Aileen's house. The dedication ceremony was simple. No mayor, no ceremony. Just a gathering of people who had chosen to believe in something better. Alira read from a page she had written late the night before. We cannot change what has been, but we can choose what we become after. I was once auctioned, not for what I was worth, but for what others wanted to take. I now give back, not because I have to, but because I can. This house stands for every girl who was told she was less, and every man who believed he was too late to make it right. The crowd stood in silence. Some cried, some closed their eyes, and the farmer, standing at the edge of it all, quietly turned to leave. His work was done. Alira saw him walk away and didn't follow. She didn't need to. Their bond didn't need proximity. It was built from pain, kindness, redemption, and above all, choice. Years passed, and Aileen's house became more than a shelter. It became a school, a refuge, a movement. Girls from faraway towns came with nothing but their names and left with dreams forged in iron and kindness. And above the mantel inside the home, a single carved bird remained, wings outstretched, perched in mid-flight. A silent symbol of one man's choice to raise his hand, not in power, not in profit, but in protection. And Alira? She became legend. Not because she was once a virgin about to be auctioned, but because she chose to rise from it and build something that no one could ever sell.